Hi, and welcome to the Inspired Podcast, Leading the Way in Education. I'm your host, Andrea De La Cerda, and each week I'm bringing you insightful discussions and news about changes in the landscape of education and entrepreneurship. Today's episode is a very special one. Our community provides support to marginalized communities through a number of grant-funded work-based learning programs. And if you're familiar with the work that Candula does, you've seen that. However, this episode is about taking time to recognize that being marginalized is not only linked to race, income, country of origin, language, and disability, but also the LGBTQIA+ community is one that's often overlooked and one that really deserves to be highlighted today. We're speaking with Meera Mohan-Graham, an expert and advocate for marginalized communities. Moving through the world as a queer woman of color, married to a man, a transgender man, as the US-born daughter of South Indian immigrants, and as someone with decades of chronic health issues, Meera's lens is deeply informed by her experience of living at the intersections of many identities without fully belonging to any singular community. Meera Mohan-Graham, she's a coach, writer, and speaker that supports marginalized people in reclaiming their full sense of self and stepping into their power and agency, all while navigating the painful realities of oppression and discrimination. From years of direct practice with clients, she created her own self-liberation framework, building upon existing research and internalized expression and liberation psychology. Meera believes that when marginalized people learn to show up on our own terms with intention, integrity, and unwavering self-trust, we become living, breathing forms of direct action against oppression. I am thrilled to welcome Meera to our podcast today. Meera, thank you so much for being here. It's so good to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just, you bring so much breadth and depth in your experience and in your perspective that I'm thrilled that we get to learn from you today and from, your journey. So maybe let's start by just, sharing, if you could maybe share with us, what are the personal experiences that you've had that have most significantly shaped your journey as an entrepreneur? I mean, you have your own business as well, so that had to have been interesting.
Yes. I think that early on, so I came to the work that I'm doing now in a really unexpected way because I began as a documentary wedding photographer. And very early on in that journey, not only did the work that I chose to do shape how I ended up where I am now, but I also had to decide in this landscape where people often used these ideas of neutrality, like I could appeal to everyone. I had to make a decision really early on. Was I going to try to appeal to everyone and in doing so flatten myself and who I am? And never speak about my identity so that I could make sure that I was quote unquote neutral, which really meant as comfortable to the normative folks. So like white, cis, straight people who are also marrying white, cis, straight people. So right away, like my entrepreneurship journey from day one, I had to engage in this question of to what extent do I allow myself to be informed by my own experiences and present and offer those to people, knowing that it will be a massive turnoff to certain folks or even enraging to certain folks.
But at the same time, if you can't show up as your authentic self, I mean, that's really impressive, though, from the jump that you were able to recognize that you needed to come from this place of authenticity, or that at least you asked yourself that question so early on. I mean, we speak with entrepreneurs who I think, try to fit themselves in that box, for as long as possible, and it's not working, but takes a tremendous amount of courage to step into a place of authenticity if you're afraid you're going to be judged or,
Right. And I think what's so often modeled in the vernacular is how do you appeal to everyone? Like
right.
when we look at who's giving business advice and it's just how can you make as much money from as many people as possible? And I had to really look and say, is that what I'm looking to do here? And also to then question, what am I modeling? Because in my work, my documentary work, in the clients that I was working with who were primarily themselves marginalized, interracial couples, queer couples, or just folks coming who didn't have external marginalizations, but they were coming from complex like family histories and blended families and complicated stories. And I'm telling everyone to be authentic. So how on earth would it be acceptable for me as a business owner to not model that level of authenticity?
Yeah, absolutely. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, at what point in your life did you come to that realization of like, I'm different and I don't fit within these norms? Was it early on in your life, would you say? Or was it really, after embarking on, because even as a documentary wedding photographer,
Mhm.
did you went down that path because of course, navigating some of those complexities was familiar to you. So were you, it feels like you really discovered this early on in your life, no? Because you're not very old. You're like,
I'm 41.
okay.
So I mean,
Which is not
people
old, by the way.
it's not old, but it's not super young either. Like I'm right in the, I would say, like the center of my life, or the prime of what feels like the prime of my life. Um, I I think all marginalized people, whether or not we know how to name it or identify it or speak about it, we are aware of difference very, very early on. So for me, some of my first memories are I was in a Catholic preschool and I didn't know how to articulate what was happening to me, but I knew there was something about me that seemed to really bother the predominantly white nuns.
Mm,
And I got this
wow.
feeling that there was something about me. I remember the first time that I thought my skin color, something about it is terrible. Clearly, it makes me ugly. My name is ugly. My last name is being kind of spat at me, and that was all happening between the ages of 5 and 7.
Wow.
So while you can't articulate what it is that's happening or what it is that makes you wrong to so many people, you're having experiences at a really young age that tell you that. Um, and I didn't name for myself or realize until I was 18 that I was queer. It was in college that I suddenly just realized, oh, this, I don't have
Mhm.
girl crushes or whatever it is that I thought I had. Like, um, I'm equally attracted to, specific people, and their gender identity doesn't matter to me.
Mhm.
Um, but that was the realization of it. And then as soon as that happened, it was almost like a movie, like in a film where all of a sudden you see the montage, oh, Bruce Willis is a dead person. You have the whole montage and the realization. I suddenly went back to my first crushes at a very young age and realized, oh, I've always been different in this way. And it's one of the things that's made even my interactions with people different, or the societal messages I picked up when and how really different. But I didn't understand why that was. I kind of put it all on race for a long time.
Okay. Isn't that so interesting? As we get older and we have these insightful moments of, oh, and then, oh, I'm realizing something about myself now. And then the hindsight, how the hindsight
Yes.
is so 50-50. I'm going through some of those in my own life too. When you look back and just think, wow, it was so confusing when I was in it. And now looking back, it's just the clarity is really, it's wonderful, actually.
Yeah, as
Legit.
you say that, I'm thinking recently I've been thinking a lot that you've accessed clarity in the current moment when all of a sudden many things start to fall in place and make sense from the
Mhm.
past as well.
Yeah.
Like I feel like that's the marker of I've opened into some truth about myself or truth about the world, because all of a sudden so much makes sense and falls into place and isn't dissonant anymore.
hmm I mean, I know people who have gone their entire life and don't have the courage to look to get that clarity. Um,
Yeah.
and that's it's. Ugh. I'm learning to love those moments, despite the uncomfortableness, right? The uncomfortable in between. But
Yeah, they're
uh,
terrifying. They're
mhm.
such a they mark an unknown change in ourselves when we face something, and that is scary.
And I think as entrepreneurs, particularly, right? There's money on the line. There's your
Mm-hmm.
livelihood on the line.
Mm-hmm.
It can be playing it quote unquote safe, whether that in the end really is safe, but playing, and I love the way that you started this conversation really talking about how you really had to make that decision of, well, if I'm going to be authentic and I'm going to teach others to be authentic, I need to show up for myself. That does take a lot. That takes a lot of courage.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hmm. So I want to, when we first met, we talked about, a little bit about mindset and your perspective and your approach to it and mine. And this, full disclosure for me, and I've shared a little bit about this with you too, that it's only really in recent years that I've just fully embraced this journey of mindset. I've been an entrepreneur for 13 plus years. I'm probably, many more, but I've never really seen it, understood how mindset is so intertwined in my business. That the way that we see ourselves, the way that we see ourselves in the world, and then of course the value that we bring to the world can be is so impacted by just our thoughts, or are maybe held back sometimes by some of our limiting beliefs. And as I've kind of identified those limiting beliefs and tried to clear those from in my life, you had a slightly different perspective on it, and I loved what you said. And I'd love for you to maybe just share a little bit about, we're going to have listeners who understand mindset, maybe others that it's new to them, different modalities, maybe they've experimented, but it's a bit new. So, but I'd love to hear how you approach this with your clients and what you teach, because I think it's a very unique perspective and important for others
Yeah.
to hear.
Yeah. So I think I think the words I had said to you, and I loved how you received it, as you were talking about mindset and so excitedly. And I just looked right in your face and said, I'm actually against use of like straightforward mindset work with marginalized people. Um, and at the
Yes, which
time,
shut me up pretty quick. And so it's like, tell me
which
more.
right. Well, and I want to name that I loved how you received it, because I was sharing it in order to be open so that I didn't suddenly say something when we were talking in this way where we're recorded and it's going to be public and coming out of nowhere, right? I wanted to be really open and honest with you. And then instead of saying, "Ooh, let's avoid that topic," then your immediate response was like, "Great. We can talk about it together on this
Mhm.
recorded podcast that people will hear." So I just want to give sort of like a shout out to, I think you modeled something that truly, when we're trying to create anti-oppressive space, our ability to say, "Oh, okay, I want to know, tell me more,"
Yeah.
to anyone that we're sitting across from is really incredible. So mindset work. First of all, I do want to say that when I'm talking about mindset work and saying that I'm pretty vehemently against it, I'm against it in the form and shape that it often takes, which is this idea of like your thoughts, generate your thoughts and beliefs, generate your outcomes. And
Right.
if you can find these limiting beliefs, you can change outcomes and change how you're operating. And I absolutely know that a central piece of working with people is we need to deeply understand our internal landscape. So I'm not against that. I'm not against our awareness of, wow, I'm carrying this story about myself and it's incredibly painful. And because I carry that story, it's influencing how I move through the world, the things I allow myself to dream about. Like, of course, we want to understand the internal landscape.
Right.
Where limiting, sort of the idea of limiting beliefs and just sort of simply going at it in that way can cause big trouble. Let me let me offer an example, actually, and then I can get into where I think it causes trouble. So you have all these experiences of running a woman-led business as a woman, and you have a team of women. And imagine if someone on your team came up to you, or you yourself were experiencing some kind of space, maybe with one of the partners that you're working with, and it's a really misogynistic space.
Ugh,
People
yes.
are talking over you, you're experiencing sexism, there's a lot of demeaning wording, and you are frustrated and trying to figure out how on earth do I navigate this space? It feels awful. And my first response to you is to say, okay, Andrea, so what limiting beliefs do you think you're carrying into this space?
I mean, the only thing I want to do when those situations arise, which it happens far too often,
Yeah.
and in protection of both myself and my team, because you're right, my team is all women,
Yeah.
nothing infuriates me more than when I bring my team into those conversations, and not so much that I'm getting it, but I get so protective of the women on my team that they don't need to be listening to, they don't need to be exposed to this. But my first reaction is to just I is cut those people out of my life, cut them out of my business, right? Is that kind of where you're going in your thinking on this?
Yeah. So
Because
that's,
you're right, it's not my limiting belief that's making these people speak to me, speak down to me or over me.
yeah, that's exactly it. So when we go, if I were to be like, oh, what are your limiting beliefs? It can only lead one place, which is you have to blame yourself for what's happening here. And that's what I've seen with marginalized people. Like people will come to me and we will be talking about a really painful dynamic or reality that they're in. And I will ask the question of, why do you think what's happening to you matters? Or why do you think this emotion is coming up for you when you experience this? And the first place I'll see people go is, you're right, that's just a limiting thought. And it's because they've been exposed to that kind of idea so often in so many spaces that when I say why, and I actually want to know why, I want to know their why, I want to know what they're experiencing internally, their first inclination is to blame themselves. You're right, I'm the one overthinking this. You're right, what's happening to me isn't real. And so when I'm working with a marginalized person, the actual first place I need to go isn't the internal landscape because they're not existing in a vacuum. You as a woman are not existing in a vacuum. I actually spend time on the limiting reality.
Mm,
Like, what is real here that we need to be willing to acknowledge and admit to ourselves and feel grief around and feel rage about,
right.
which is what I hear you doing when you say, I'm going to protect my team. You're like, I recognize that this environment is real, that it is oppressive,
Mhm.
that it is painful and could cause pain to other people on my team. And in that knowledge, you're then saying, what choice do I want to make?
Right.
But it's an awful choice too. And sometimes when we get into this place of like, oh, if you can just change your beliefs, you can change everything, we're not willing to say, you know what really sucks? The fact that you have to pull out of a space or an opportunity as the only way to protect women on your team and yourself from some of these toxic behaviors. That's actually a really heartbreaking and horrific reality, but it's one we need to contend with because we can't pretend that all opportunities work the exact same way for all of us.
Right. And I think as it's taken a few reps, right? Because I think I used to
Yeah.
believe that I couldn't let those opportunities go. I know they're tied to, there's a dollar amount tied to them. There's my livelihood that's tied to that,
Yeah.
and so it wasn't so easy to let them go. But I now feel though that there's some satisfaction in saying goodbye and cutting the cord from opportunities that are in no way going to support me and my mental health and my team and their mental health, and just allowing us, you know, not going to allow us the opportunity to show up and do our best work. And so it's not a fit, you know?
Yeah.
And that's becoming easier to do now, but it's taken a lot of reps. And you're right about the rage. Boy, there's how many times have I had this internal dialogue where I'm like, it's not fair. It's not fair.
Yeah. It's not.
It's just not
It's just not. I mean,
fair.
and that's when I'm doing this work, and I recently just wrapped up the first time I've ever done sort of like a course and group work around it. And I think the most interesting dialectic for everyone to sit in is that I kept saying, you can be so powerful and you're going to be powerful by reclaiming your right to set the terms of what you do and don't do and how you do and don't engage. And the world will continue to be unjust and you will hate it and it will break your heart, but you're not going to keep trying to control it by controlling yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You don't manage your thoughts to manage oppressive environments. You say, I see this oppressive environment and I give myself the right and the permission and the power to say, I reject this environment, or here's how I will engage in this environment. And here are the parts of myself I will be withholding. And that's still not fair, but I will be the one setting those terms.
Right.
And that's the piece where I'm like, simply going at it as this is an internal mindset thing is so dangerous because it keeps affirming that it's you. It's you. If you only did this right, Andrea, if you could just figure out how to talk to, the men or the sort of misogyny upholders in this space, the space would be different. Just shift your mindset, like that's what we want to not ever do. Go ahead.
Right. Or even the way you kind of, even when I'm thinking back on some of the mindset work that I've recently done, specifically around NLP and some hypnosis, we did go back. There's a lot of like going back, right? To, that first moment when you first felt this belief. When was that? Where were you? What were you thinking? Who were you with? And I think, if I'm honest, I'm the oldest of three siblings. I'm a female. I lived in quite an oppressive culture, in my home. It was very strict, very religious. And I think that subconsciously, yeah, there were little things that I picked up. And I'm not sure I could even tell you exactly what those were, like exactly that one. They're just little microaggressions, right? That when you're in that, beta brainwave phase from like infant to 7 years old, and then you're just that sponge that collects. I don't know. I mean, there were a series of microaggressions probably every day in my early years that I just internalized. And so I appreciate what you're saying. I can go back and I can try to separate myself from those thoughts. But if the world is continuing to give me those thoughts, the challenge is like, look, that's on you. That's not on me. And I
Yeah.
think that's kind of what you're saying, no? That I can go back and I can try to figure it out, but at the end of the day, it's not so much about me. It's really not so much about me.
No, it's exactly. It's not so much about you and these things you're carrying that even we try to then separate from ourselves as, oh, those are just thoughts. I'm like, they were strategies. Like accepting the messages of what we were told was a way to move through the world without feeling constantly fractured and dissonant. And so they were actually really effective strategies. And we don't need to reject them and sort of demean ourselves by saying what a silly thought to carry around. We need to say, if that's not the strategy I want to use anymore, but the world remains hard and the
Right.
world continues to put me in positions where I need to figure out what to do. I don't want to reject this strategy, but maybe I do want to change it. Maybe I do want to heal the hurt part of this and the things that I internalized in order to survive that are now actually really painful ways to view and think of myself and think of what I need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just such a deeper thing than saying you can just shift your mindset. It's such a deeper healing, self-acceptance, radical acceptance of an agonizing world. I had a client, if I can share one example, and they're a person of color, they're non-binary and queer, they have a disability. And at some point, we were realizing that they carry all this fear about the future, and it made them worry that at the end of our work, they kept saying, I'm going to like backslide. I'm going to go back. I'm just going to revert. And we were exploring and trying to understand, like, where is this fear coming from? Because you've done such courageous work. And I certainly had no fear of them reverting. They're going to have hard moments where they don't show up for themselves the way they want. They're going to have beautiful moments that they do. And that's just being human. Um, and somewhere in there, they said, oh, the world has been so hard that I've just taught myself that it's easier and safer to not be my full self. And I looked them in the face and I said, well, it is. And then we just kind of stared at each other for about 30 seconds. Like I saw their face go wide. And then and the thing that they said after, and I elaborated a little bit, and I was like, don't gaslight yourself. You are
Oh,
absolutely
so good.
right. Right? Don't gaslight yourself. Of course, it is easier and safer to move through this world hiding who you are insofar as you can. And when you say that the world becomes harder externally when you are your full truth, you are correct. So we're not gonna put that on you. And they expressed that when we really sat in that, kind of the two things that came up were soft despair. Because in a way, if they just kept blaming themselves, it was like, well, if I could just change myself, if I could be braver, if I could be whatever, these realities would be different. But the other thing they felt was relief.
Yes.
Like,
I get that. Relief. Like you don't have, it's not your responsibility to just like, it, a lot of pressure is off.
yeah. Yeah. Like, you don't make the world safer. The world is unsafe
Right.
and unfair. And that's not on you.
Yeah.
It is a reality that, each of us in whatever way that we experience that world have to then say, given that, what feels like showing up for myself and what feels like self-betrayal, and how do I balance those things, and how do I make the best choices on behalf of myself, not in an effort to change the circumstances that I'm in, as though I ever had the power to do that.
I mean, I've learned so much, from you as a coach and as a person who wants to support women entrepreneurs. I mean, all women come with so many stories. They have their own crazy family dynamics. They may, depending, they may not even what their sexual preferences, they may, of course, the misogyny is always challenging. But I mean, I really appreciate your perspective because it opens my eyes and the lens for when I am supporting women entrepreneurs. There's such complexity there. It isn't just that we're getting in our own way because we are struggling with the imposter syndrome and uh, I mean, these are all common, right? These are all common, but there's might be more to it that's bringing all this up. And I think that you've helped me see that there could be so much more to the story and exploring supporting these women to show their authentic selves than what I originally thought. So I really appreciate you and thank you for that because I mean as a teacher and a coach myself, I think it helps me show up better for my clients and surely those that are listening, I hope that they have learned something today from you too.
Yeah.
Can you, if someone wants to get in touch with you or learn more about your process, what's the best way to do that? And can you maybe share a little bit about what that intake process looks like? Like who do you work with? And what might they expect to
Yeah.
get from their relationship with you?
So the best way to poke around, explore all my stuff is just to go to my website. It's just meeragraham.com, Meera, Graham
And
like graham cracker.
we'll include it in our show notes,
Perfect.
so it'll be easy.
And I'm always really like open and transparent about all the work I do, all the costs of everything I do that's really important to me. So people can see anything that they need to see just to learn about my work. They can sign up for my emailed love notes. There are things where once a month I do more vulnerable sharing about myself. so that I'm not always put in this position of, Meera's some kind of authority figure. She has it all figured out. Part of what I want to offer to people is that I am human and in this human story and dealing with these daily struggles and injustices and confusion all the time as well. And the work that I do, my group, which I will run again next year, so people can get on the wait list right now, is specifically only for folks who identify as marginalized. And the work that we do there is a lot of these concepts, helping people really get to the heart of how we learn to survive.
Mhm.
And we integrated all of these survival strategies into who we actually think we are. I just think I'm someone who loves being competent and excellent. And then we find that underneath that, as we continue overriding our needs for rest, is a way that we learned that if we were excellent, maybe we could make up for white supremacy culture.
Mm.
If I, as little Meera, discovering a talent for singing suddenly made me someone really beloved in my community instead of someone who was constantly a pariah. So is it that I love singing and I love nurturing my
Wow.
voice?
Hmm.
Or is it that I learned that that would offer me safety or being exceptional? Um, the course is a space where we really look back at how did we build these social strategies for existing in safety and how are they hurting us now and what do we want to do instead? So we can just change the way we're interfacing day to day without pretending that reality isn't real and that reality isn't unfair.
So,
So go ahead.
so if someone's listening,
Mhm.
what might they be thinking right now or struggling with that would make them a great fit to work with you? I mean, they probably don't have it all figured out yet. They probably are
Mhm.
experiencing, maybe there's like if there's a tug of war going. What are those feelings and what are those thoughts like?
Yeah. I often say that the perfect person to come work with me is someone who is sitting in this place of saying, I can't keep doing it this way.
Hmm.
And I know that whatever this is, the feeling of that, like the way I'm existing, the way I'm interacting with people, it's unsustainable. And it feels like I'm allowing myself to lose myself. And that could be in relationship to capitalism, it could be in relationship to interpersonal relationships, or just even how they're willing to access themselves. And they're now in a place of saying, I really want to do it a different way, but I cannot see realistically any possibility of doing things differently. And so I don't even know what I want. I'm just having this ambiguous sensation that it's not working the way I'm doing it and that I'm somehow losing access to parts of myself, or I feel like I'm self-betraying. I'm not living my full truth, but I cannot for the life of me figure out how one can live their own truth unless what a lot of people will say is, I just go live by myself in the woods or on an island.
Mm.
And then I don't have to deal with how the world treats me as a marginalized person, but that's the only way I see that I could ever be a truer form of myself. Those are folks that, people come to me for one-on-one in the same way because I do leadership work or whole person work. And it's that same feeling of, I'm not willing to not be my full self anymore, but I cannot for the life of me figure out how I could show up differently for myself, what that would look like, what it would look like for me. And all of this work is about whether it's the coursework where I still then make people do reflective work and tie everything back to how it applies to them, or one on one where I'm just gently pulling out from the person, like, who are you? Because I don't know either. It would be
Right.
arrogant to say so.
Yeah.
Like, but how do we gently extract from you all these secrets you kind of hide from yourself in the name of survival?
Mm. And I'm listening as you're talking about that individual. It's just and it's heartbreaking, that anyone would go their whole life, hiding from the world in that way or pretending. I can relate. I think about all the times I've shown up in such a masculine way in my first 45 years or 40 years of my life,
Yeah.
because it was easier, and so I understand absolutely. but hearing the way that you're talking about it, it's also heartbreaking at the same time. So, yeah, I hope that those who are listening and who can resonate with how you're explaining this, like really do reach out to you, because that's just you're doing something so wonderful for people. And I appreciate you and thank you for what you're teaching me.
Yeah.
And thanks so much for joining today. Is there anything else you want to share with as we close this out that we haven't
No,
said?
just for anyone that's listening for whom this is resonating, whether it's resonating in work you do or it's resonating for you personally, probably both,
Mm-hmm.
just to keep remembering none of this is our fault. We are all in systems and structures that are so much bigger than us. And the question simply becomes, who will I choose to be within the difficult realities of this system?
Yeah.
And that's it.
And everyone has an impact to make.
Mhm.
Everybody's here for, everyone can make an impact in the world. And how much bigger of an impact can you make when you can show up as your truly as your authentic self?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Meera. And that's about all we have today. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into this episode, very special episode. If you enjoyed it, please review, like, subscribe, and we will make sure to include all of this information that Meera has shared with resources in our episode notes. So thank you so much for tuning in, and join us next Thursday.